As I said, even back in 2003, I knew within myself that we were missing out on justice with Robert. Ashamed that I was so focused on finding an offender and convicting someone that I did not see Robert. I did not hear his voice.
So the old shaken baby idea was whoever was with the child when they collapsed must be guilty of a horrible crime because it would have happened instantly.
For Robert, he has the full support of the innocence community in Texas and nationwide.
He's an innocent man, and we are very close to killing him.
Enraged, I'm heartbroken, but we are not giving up this fight.
Robert Roberson, a CBS19 Special Report.
Thank you for joining us for this CBS19 Special Report on CBS19 Plus. I'm Jesus Martinez. By now you've heard the name, Robert Roberson. He's an East Texas man who many say was wrongfully convicted in the death of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki. He was set to be executed Thursday, October 17th, but a last-minute temporary restraining order issued by a judge in Travis County has halted the lethal injection for now. The judge ruled that the state does not have enough authority to execute Roberson if it prevents him from complying with a last-minute legislative subpoena. Now, this temporary order stopping his execution lasts for 2 weeks, and that ruling still stands at the time of this recording. However, developments have happened hours after this stay. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Texas Attorney General's office filed the appeals with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, who then vacated the Travis County judge's order. A writ was also filed with the Texas Supreme Court, which the Attorney General's office is also appealing. So as of this recording, Roberson's execution remains pending. Nevertheless, the judge's ruling to halt the execution was huge news for those who have been pushing for his innocence. On your screen right now is a timeline of the events of how we got to this point. Roberson was convicted in 2003, and according to law enforcement officials who were called into the hospital the day he brought his daughter to the Palestine Regional Medical Center. Nikki had bruises on her body and a knot in the back of her head, enough at the time to diagnose her with a shaken baby syndrome. But her autopsy later revealed she had pneumonia at the time of her death and had been prescribed opioids. Experts have also said that the shaken baby theory supporting Roberson's death sentence no longer holds scientifically.
That Nikki's lungs were highly diseased. She had 2 different kinds of pneumonia ravishing her lungs. And she had been extremely sick the whole week before, and Robert had taken her to the doctor, taken her to the pediatrician.
There have been several last-minute attempts to stop his execution, and the latest news halting the execution may just be the time advocates need to continue providing evidence and pushing for his innocence. On Wednesday, October 16th, there was a hearing with the state's Pardons and Parole Board, but ultimately denied Roberson's request for clemency. After that hearing, a Texas House committee also voted to subpoena Roberson, who called him to testify in front of him. Legal analysts say they have called that an unexpected move. Just moments before our 5 p.m. newscast on October 17th, we learned that Robert Roberson's execution had been halted. We were able to speak to Vanessa Potkin, who is the Director of Special Litigation at the Innocence Project and co-counsel for Robert Roberson. You're about to see the entire conversation with her. We want to bring in Vanessa Potkin, Director of Special Litigation at the Innocence Project and co-counsel for Robert Roberson, to join us now. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I know this is just breaking news in the last 30 minutes. What do we know so far about the halt of Mr. Roberson's execution tonight?
Well, we are just about an hour away from when Robert was scheduled to be executed, and in a very unprecedented move, a judge in Travis County has issued a temporary restraining order because Mr. Roberson has been subpoenaed to testify before the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence, who yesterday took up hearings on the application of Texas's junk science statute. This is a law that was put in place to provide relief, excuse me, for people like Robert who were convicted based on science that we know is no longer valid.
Vanessa, talk a little bit more about how big this stay is just a couple of hours before he was scheduled to be executed, as you just mentioned.
Well, this is a culmination of years of fighting to try to correct this injustice. And we've been trying in so many different venues to get relief for Mr. Roberson and to get his innocence claim finally heard. And yesterday was the first day that testimony was presented where experts who talked about what happened to his daughter and why she died. And we were able to finally present that evidence. But it was, of course, before a legislative committee that was looking into the why Texas's junk science statute has not been a pathway to relief so far for Mr. Roberson. So, I mean, to get to this point where we're almost an hour away from when he was scheduled to be executed, and the fight is not over because the Attorney General's office has indicated that they're going to try to appeal this decision.
And I know you mentioned this took years and years upon to prove his innocence, and most recently getting bipartisan legislators involved as well. How are you and your team feeling right now?
Well, it's an unprecedented amount of support. You know, we had over 80 lawmakers, Republicans, Democrats sign on a letter to say this execution needs to be stopped. The lead detective, Brian Wharton, who played a role in arresting Robert and was a key witness at his trial, has come forward to say, I helped send an innocent man to death row based on what I was told was medical evidence, and now we know better. So we've just had such an outpouring of support that you don't see, but what it is reflective of is that people recognize that an innocent man was set to be executed. And you know, if the state officials continue to appeal, you know, we don't want to be in a position where somebody innocent is executed, and months from now, the legislature is able to go back and clarify and make fixes to the law, which was intended for people exactly like Robert Roberson.
And now that there's this stay on his execution today, what's next for his case and Robert Roberson?
Well, we need to make sure that this stay stays in place, and that any efforts to undo this are unsuccessful. And then we'll be continuing to fight to get the evidence of his innocence heard by a court. No court has ever listened to some of the new evidence from lung pathologists that show why his daughter died. She had fatal pneumonia. And what was so just unbelievable about the hearings that we saw yesterday before the Texas Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence was that the district attorney in Robert's case came and testified, and she acknowledged that she hasn't even looked at the new expert reports. She has not considered the new evidence of Robert's innocence, and yet she's fighting for this execution to go forward.
Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us at this late hour for this breaking news. Of course, we'll continue to follow any new developments that happened throughout this evening and as this case goes on. Vanessa, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Roberson's attorneys also pleading to the Supreme Court of the United States to issue a stay of execution. However, they declined to intervene. In a statement regarding the court's decision not to intervene, Justice Sonia Sotomayor emphasized that, quote, few cases more urgently call for a stay of execution than the one where the accused has made a serious showing of actual innocence, as Roberson has here, end quote. But there is no claim under federal law for the Supreme Court to act on, she concluded. Instead, she wrote, Roberson's only remaining hope is a reprieve from Governor Greg Abbott. Now, we have reached out to the governor's office. In fact, our sister station in Corpus Christi was at an event the night of October 17th and asked Abbott for comment on Roberson's case as he was leaving and declined to comment. Texas Representative John Busey III was outside the prison in Huntsville and spoke to reporters shortly after the news of the temporary halt for Roberson's execution broke.
Justice Sotomayor is right. I think if you look at the evidence, which I'm assuming she did in her dissent, is Robert is innocent. And so I agree with her. The governor can act. We hope he will act. We are pleading with him to act. This is a bipartisan coalition, as you all know. This is members of the far left and members of the far right and everyone in between in the Texas House that have looked at this and know that this case has too much shadow of a doubt for it to move forward. And we're imploring the governor to act in his ability and act today. And he can do that, and it's not too late. I can't speak for the governor, but I hope he's listening. I hope his team is listening. It's not too late to act, Governor Abbott, and we need you to do so and save this life. You have the ability to do a 30-day pause. Let's do that pause. Let's make sure that nothing bad and no mistake happens here today.
Roberson's case is significant not only because of its specific circumstances, but also because it serves as a cautionary tale about the potential failings of the justice system and the importance of ensuring that wrongful convictions are identified and rectified. CBS 19's Ayana Aird explains the latest on this case and why advocates are working so hard to reverse this death sentence.
For more than 20 years, Robert Roberson has been on death row, convicted of killing his daughter Nikki in 2003 for what medical examiners and pediatrician called shaken baby syndrome.
Robert's daughter falling off a playscape, they land with sufficient force and just the wrong way, it can cause this same condition that was found in his daughter.
Sween also says the same set of conditions is internal to pneumonia, but the recent illness she had was never investigated.
So the old shaken baby idea was whoever was with the child when they collapsed must be guilty of a horrible crime because it would have happened instantly.
Sween says they are concerned Roberson never had a fair hearing because she believes the retired judge wasn't following the proper procedure.
That a lack of transparency really around how this particular judge made these decisions. And if the new judge agrees with us, the execution warrant would be voided. That many people across the political spectrum have been raising concerns about the case, speaking out. And that has certainly been a comfort to Robert in a very, very stressful time.
East Texas State Representative Jay Dean and 85 other representatives throughout the state of Texas sent a letter to court in support of Roberson's innocence.
Rally around, life, and if there's some evidence that's come forward, scientific evidence that shows that two things. One, then it disputes the phenomenon called baby shaking, but also that the child had other physiological complications. That's what the child died from.
In Tyler, I'm Ayana Aird, CBS 19.
Roberson was convicted on February 11th of 2003, and during his trial, detectives believed his lack of emotion at the hospital was a lack of care or empathy. But it wasn't until after he was convicted that a late diagnosis of autism was found to be the reason for his behavior. Roberson's attorneys claim his demeanor in the hospital and in interviews with detectives after his daughter's death played a large role in how the jury received him. Marcus Wade is a licensed mental health professional right here in East Texas. Now, he's not affiliated with this case, but we wanted to bring him on as an expert to provide more context surrounding autism and this diagnosis. Marcus, thank you for joining us. I know you've been following this case just a little bit, but what's been the most interesting piece of information surrounding Roberson's diagnosis?
Well, we know autism is something you can get diagnosed as a child, or it can come on late onset as a teenager or an adult. Sometimes it's triggered through trauma or just everyday living. So it depends on how he was being affected coming through high school up into adulthood that actually kind of affected any of his behaviors and choices dealing with someone with autism at this age.
And I know this is something the jury perceived to be his demeanor. What are some of the mannerisms that the jury could have seen in that trial?
Maybe a flat affect, maybe non-responding with any smiles, not having any high verbal skills. Even if I'm high functioning in autism, I may not interact with people a lot, so I'm a loner. I'm independent a lot. I don't really socialize well with others. And if I do, I still have a shyness. I have a standoffish approach to certain things. And I don't communicate well what my needs are, what my emotions are, what my thought processes are. This is one of the symptomatic things that people with autism really present throughout their lifespan.
And in these recent weeks and days especially, there's been a large effort to halt the execution, this diagnosis being one of the main reasons. What do you think the outcome of this diagnosis could be in this execution outcome?
I don't know. I mean, if it's a true diagnosis, they say it was diagnosed after the trial, so I don't know what his symptoms were during his lifespan. Again, they have to go back and kind of look at some school records and things like that to bring things to fruition of how he actually was functioning as an adult. And if he was not actually unhealthy in his decision making, we don't know what happened to cause this particular behavior. But a person with autism usually have very limited empathetic type of responses to things. So it's not really a connection with emotions a lot. So you see this flatline effect throughout this process of people with autism. And sometimes you can have agitation come in without even being triggered with anything. It's just something in the brain that allows you not to function at a high capacity. So it's unsure how maybe it may impact the outcome of everything dealing with him being in the situation he is the effect that the diagnosis allows a person to not have all their mental faculties aligned so they can make healthy decisions despite what condition they're in.
And I know this was a late diagnosis of autism on Mr. Roberson. How do you diagnose if someone has autism?
Testing, psychological testing for sure. You can identify what their acute ratings are, dealing with how they answer questions, how to respond to certain questions in an assessment data bank that they give everyone that may be assessed with this particular diagnosis. And they pull together all the tools through question and answers that they may do with a physical face-to-face interview as well. And they pull the information together and they come up with a diagnosis. And that's for anyone that may have a mental health disorder. But it begins to pinpoint things based on, again, the symptoms that are aligned with how they responded to the questions on the testing instrument, as well as what they did in the clinical interview itself.
And how do you think this late diagnosis influenced the case up until where we are now?
That's a good question. I think it pretty much caused it to want to be at a halt at this time. If the person has a true diagnosis of autism, they may not have been in the right balanced mental faculties at the time that this particular crime was committed. So it's something to question about and see if someone needs more help and adjustment with their thought processes and their mood and their stability versus thinking they were cognitively enough to know what they were doing at the time that they actually committed the act.
All right, Dr. Wade, thank you so much for joining us here to give us some expert advice on this different angle of the Robert Roberson case.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
The halt issued by a state district judge in Travis County is just temporary. At the time of this recording, it still stands, and we'll be able to tell in the coming days what's next. In the meantime, CBS News correspondent Nikki Batiste spoke to the lead detective in Roberson's case, who is now pleading lawmakers to give him a second chance, saying Robert is an innocent man.
The lead detective in Robert Robertson's case told a panel of Texas lawmakers Wednesday morning he'd gotten it wrong.
He's an innocent man, and we are very close to killing him for something he did not do.
Brian Wharton first met Roberson in the emergency room in 2002 when he brought his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki Curtis, to the hospital where she later died. He told Wharton his daughter was sick and had fallen off the bed while sleeping.
His child was in the emergency room. She was in desperate circumstances, and he was not particularly emotional. He answered questions when we talked to him. He was very cooperative, but you just never got a feeling that what was going on around him bothered him.
Wharton says he's ashamed he misunderstood the behavior.
How did that change your feelings about what you saw that day?
Well, it made everything make sense. Now I have a name for it. Now I can understand it. It would have been nice to have known back then, sure.
When did you last see him?
2 weeks ago.
What were the last words you said to each other?
I love you. Yeah.
34 shaken baby cases have been exonerated in 18 states and the U.S. Army since 1992.
Robert was instantly judged with suspicion.
On Tuesday, Gretchen Sween, Roberson's lawyer, asked the U.S. Supreme Court to halt his execution. Roberson has 2 other children.
Robert is this very sweet, simple soul. And what he has always said is that we have to keep hope. And he refers to this letter he got from his other daughter when he was sent away to prison, which said, "Daddy, don't ever give up hope."
Texas argues claims raised by Robertson's lawyers are, quote, unworthy of the court's attention. Last night, Roberson was issued a subpoena to testify before a Texas House committee that is reconsidering the lawfulness of his conviction in a hearing next week. A spokesperson for the Department of Criminal Justice told us it will consult the Attorney General's office on the appropriate next steps. Nikki Batiste, CBS News, Huntsville, Texas.
And since then, a lot of developments have happened in the hours after the judge's execution halt. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Texas Attorney General's office filed the appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, who then vacated the Travis County judge's order. A writ was also filed with the Texas Supreme Court, which the AG's office is also appealing. So as of this recording, Roberson's execution remains pending. For the latest on Robert Roberson's case, you can visit our website, CBS19.TV. Thank you so much for joining us on this CBS 19 special report on CBS 19 Plus.